Hello, BookTube. I'm here to talk about the second book in an ongoing series I'm reading this year in 2023. And it's just my thoughts on, basically, not a book review. But it's the chronologically second book in the Strangers and Brothers series called George Passant. Actually, it was first uh, published in 1940 as Strangers and Brothers. But when Strangers and Brothers became, at some point, the name for the overreaching series of 11 interwoven novels, then it was changed to George Passant because that is the character, the main thrust of this book. It was, as I say, the first book written in 1940, but the second chronologically. Now, it's part of a series. Well, in French, it's called a roman fleuve, I think it is. Sort of a river story or a story of river, a river story. I think how it could be translated. Basically, an interwoven set of stories that flows like a river, and in this case, it goes from 1914 to about 1968, 1970, with 11 books, and these are interwoven. The first book that I read of this, well, this is a multi read. I've read this. This is the fourth or fifth time now that I've read the series, and I'm reading it in chronological order this time. In these nice House of Stratos publications that I bought a decade ago, I think it was, at least 10 or more years ago, and it's gone through several reads. So they've held up nicely. The laminate's starting to peel a little bit, and they're a little rough around the edges, uh, like I am. Now let's see. This picks up with more detail than in the Time of Hope, the first story. And it's about George Passant, who he's a solicitor and friend of the narrator, Lewis Elliot. And was a mentor for him. He George teaches some law courses at the local technical college, and he's gathered about him. He's in his late 20s ish, beginning 30s. Throughout the novel, because it covers a few. This one covers, rather than 1914. This covers from about 19 early 20s to 1930, 31, 32 maybe. So and he's gathered about him other students and other young people, and he becomes a mentor to many of them. And he feels this is important work, and he wants to help young people. At least I think this is where it sort of starts out anyway. Um, and he does like the adoration that he gets from this. He feels responsible for them. He helps them financially. It gives them it gives people, when they get together in these groups, a place to talk about things outside of sort of the norms of society. Remember, this is 1920, so there's still, especially in sort of middle class English society. All society is very structured as well, and this gives them a place to explore other things and maybe do things outside of the norm for the culture, which causes issues because people are a suspect of this. And there also is, there's little scandals that crop up, some sexual scandals, because it's sort of, people think that, oh, he's doing this to get a stable of women. It's all this kind of stuff, and he feels that he's being persecuted in that way. But he helps, as I say, a lot of people. He helps Lewis Elliot, becoming a barrister, and helps him get his article. It's called Articles of Law, I think it is. And he starts in the same firm. George is not a partner as a solicitor. He's just a clerk in a sense, but he does a large chunk of the work for this company. They think he's very good, but they, because of his outside work activities, they don't think he would ever become, or he will. By the time of the end of the book, you know that he'll never become a partner in the business, and he loses his because there is a big stink, controversy, and a lawsuit that the thrust of this is, the story of this is. And he loses his job at the technical college, and other people that were sort of connected with him. There's a fallout as well, because people think that it's immoral what he's been doing and all this kind of things. And he's a bit of a megalomaniac to a certain extent, but I think at the heart, um, he does want to help people, and I think he did take advantage at times of situations, and that's where some of the controversy is. But the court case is pretty quite interesting, because it highlights Lewis, who's become a barrister, and he defends him, but with a leader, his from his chambers in London. So it's quite interesting. You see him coming into his own, Lewis coming into his own. In the first Time of Hope, it's sort of, he's learning. He's it's more about his personal life, rather than this. Some of this has the personal, but it also has a huge chunk of the professional life in the court scenes. But the lawsuit, getting back to the lawsuit, is because George has went in partnership with two other people, a woman, both from his sort of group, to do an advertising agency. And it was a business that was purchased off of an old employer of George's, and they sort of believed what the employer told them. But then it turns out that the information was a bit wrong, so there's money being lost from investors, and they get accused of getting money by false pretenses, and making false claims of the business. Um, and so the court case goes through for this, and it basically destroys George's life, because everything about his group comes out, the bad stuff, because the bad stuff just in people's eyes just erase anything that was good that the group had done. Um, so yeah, and I just don't know how many times, this is fourth or fifth read of this, and I thoroughly enjoy it. As I say, I'm reading it through chronologically, for story wise. So this was the first book written, but the second chronologically. The next book is the seventh book written, Conscious of the Rich, and it was written in 1958. But it's the third book chronologically. So this read through is chronological. The next time I read it, I'll read it, in publication order, because there's an interesting thing that happens when you read it in both ways, because the stories are interlocked, generally, because, as I say, things that happen in here are talked about in Time of Hope, or things in here are expanded in Time of Hope, and expanded in here that are talked. It's all interwoven, and it's interesting to see how they affect each story. And when you read them in the chronological, as opposed to the publication order, you get a different feel of things as well. And the one thing I noticed again on this read was that this one was a bit, the style it wasn't as engaging as he as he started getting with the later books. Uh, this was his third book that he'd written. He wrote two other books. Death Under Sail, I think it was, in the early 30s. Basically, a little murder mystery on a yacht. And then another one, I think around the same time, called The Search. And he used some of that kind of thing because C.P. Snow was a physical chemist, and The Search had to do with scientific, or if I remember right, a somebody who's becoming a scientist and the sort of struggles through that, and so he uses some of this later in this from that in this series later. So there's a gap there from the early 30s to 1940, and he wrote other books that are standalone novels, but he didn't do any more until after he was done with the Strangers and Brothers series in 1970. But he also wrote other nonfiction, and we discussed in the last video. I'll leave a link to the playlist here below if you want to look at the first book. And I talked slightly about the Two Cultures essay that he did, but he wrote other things. He wrote sort of little brief bios on scientists, authors, and he did a really fun biography of Anthony Trollope as well. But yeah, the Conscience of the Rich is the seventh book written, and that's, as I say, 1958. So that'll be March's read. And I really want to jump ahead with these, but I have to hold back because I'm determined to read them once a month, because I'm reading them in tandem with Anthony Pohl's Dance to the Music of Time, and I'll leave a link to the playlist for that as well below in case anybody's interested. But anyway, that's it for this month for CP Snow. I'll see you next time, BookTube.